On the night of October 17, 1983, the primary mission controller for the KH-12 variant Sentinel-4B was a young, razor-sharp captain named David Forrester. He'd been with the program for 3 years, long enough to know the satellite's every quirk, its personality. Sentinel-4B was one of the new ones, a technological marvel. Its official designation was Keyhole 12, a name that hinted at its purpose to peer through keyholes at America's adversaries. It was a billion-dollar telescope orbiting 250 miles above the Earth, its optics so precise it could, in the right conditions, read a newspaper headline from the void. Its primary mission was to monitor the western military districts of the Soviet Union, watching for the telltale signs of mobilization, new missile silo construction, or the movement of naval assets. The pass was routine. Forrester watched the telemetry stream paint its green lines across the dark screen. Altitude, nominal. Attitude, stable. Power, 98%. The satellite was over the Barents Sea, its high-gain antenna locked onto a tracking and data relay satellite, dumping a torrent of captured imagery back to Fort Belvoir. The data flow was a steady, reassuring river of ones and zeros. Then, at 3:14 Zulu, the river ran dry. It wasn't a gradual degradation, it was a guillotine drop. One moment, the data stream was a solid, vibrant green line. The next, it was a flat, dead baseline. Sierra 4 Bravo, Sunnyvale, Comcheck, Forrester said into his headset, his voice calm but edged with a sudden tension. The room around him grew quieter, other controllers sensing a shift in the atmosphere. Silence from the speaker, only the hiss of empty bandwidth. Sierra 4 Bravo, Sunnyvale, respond. We have lost your signal. Reset and reacquire. Nothing. A junior technician spoke up, his voice tight. I've got a total loss of telemetry. All channels. It's not just the downlink, sir. The command uplink it's like it's not there. No carrier wave lock. Forrester's mind raced through the checklist. A solar flare? Space weather was calm. A micrometeoroid impact? Possible, but statistically remote. An internal power bus failure? The last telemetry showed all systems green. It made no sense. A billion-dollar piece of the nation's most sensitive hardware had not just malfunctioned, it had vanished from the ether, as if it had been swallowed by the void. Initiate contingency procedure Alpha 7, Forrester ordered, his voice cutting through the growing unease. I want every ground station from Thule to Guam listening. Sweep the frequency spectrum. Find me my bird. For 72 hours they searched. The great dish-shaped ears of the world, in Alaska, in England, in the Indian Ocean, scanned the heavens, listening for the distinctive digital heartbeat of Sentinel-4B. They heard nothing but the natural radio whisper of the cosmos and the chattering of 100 other less important satellites. The official report was drafted. Catastrophic systems failure, cause undetermined. It was a black mark, a profound and embarrassing loss. In the vaults of the Pentagon and the corridors of the CIA, it was a disaster, a key intelligence asset, gone dark at a time of heightened tensions. The Cold War was in a deep freeze that winter, and the loss of a primary eye over the Soviet Union was a strategic blow. But then, 4 days after the silence fell, a technician at the Pine Gap Joint Defense Facility in the Australian outback, tasked with the monotonous duty of monitoring a wide range of frequencies for Soviet signal intelligence, noticed an anomaly. It was a blip, a tiny, almost insignificant pulse of energy in a part of the S-band spectrum that was supposed to be quiet. It was so faint and so brief he almost dismissed it as background noise. But it repeated. He marked the time. 11 minutes later it happened again. A single, sharp pulse, lasting less than 1/10 of a second. It wasn't a structured transmission. It wasn't data. It was a ghost of a signal, a whisper where there should only be silence. He cross-referenced the orbital elements of known objects. The signal was coming from the precise orbital slot where Sentinel-4B had died. The report from Pine Gap was treated with deep skepticism at NORAD's Cheyenne Mountain Complex, buried deep under 2,000 feet of solid granite. In a room not unlike the one in Sunnyvale, but dedicated to the defense of a continent rather than the control of its eyes, analysts pored over the data. Their first assumption was noise, a glitch, a burst of cosmic radiation, perhaps interference from a passing commercial airliner, though the frequency was wrong. But the Pine Gap technician had been thorough. He'd recorded the pulses. When the NORAD analysts played them back, filtered out the background hiss, and laid them out on a timeline, a cold, precise rhythm emerged. The pulses were not random, they were metronomic, every 11 minutes. Not 10, not 12, 11. The timing was exact, with an atomic clock regularity that screamed of artificial origin. Random space phenomena didn't behave with such machined precision. The head of the analysis team, a grizzled civilian scientist named Dr. R.S. Torn, who had been studying satellite signals since Sputnik, delivered the verdict. "This isn't noise," he said, his voice flat. "This is a signal, a very simple, very powerful, and very deliberate signal. Someone, or something, is pinging us." The mystery deepened immediately. A team of NRO engineers was flown to Cheyenne Mountain under deep cover. They were the men who had built Sentinel-4B. They examined the signal's characteristics, its frequency, its pulse width, its modulation. They shook their heads, baffled. The satellite's communication system operated on a completely different set of frequencies, using a complex spread spectrum technique for security. It had no transmitter, no power amplifier, no antenna that could produce this signal. It was as if a modern sports car, stripped of its engine, had started broadcasting Morse code from its cigarette lighter. "It's impossible," the lead engineer, a man named Carl Zimmerman, insisted. "There is no hardware on that bus that can generate that waveform. It would be like a pocket calculator suddenly picking up a television broadcast. The architecture isn't there." Then came the next shock. The orbital mechanics team, tracking the satellite's position using ground-based radar and optical telescopes, reported an even more baffling discovery. Sentinel-4B's orbit was stable, perfectly stable. In low Earth orbit, satellites are constantly battling atmospheric drag, a tenuous wisp of gas that slowly but surely pulls them down, decaying their orbit until they re-enter the atmosphere. Sentinel-4B should have begun a slow, lazy spiral earthward. Its orbit should have dropped by a few meters per day. It hadn't moved an inch. It was holding its station with the precision of an active satellite, its thrusters firing in tiny, imperceptible bursts to counteract drag. But according to every diagnostic they had, and according to the engineers who built it, the satellite's attitude control system was dead. Its hydrazine thrusters were cold and silent. It was a derelict ship, dead in the water, yet it was somehow sailing perfectly into the wind. Dr. Torn summarized the impossible situation for a gathering of grim-faced generals and intelligence chiefs in a secure briefing room. "Gentlemen, we have a satellite that is officially dead. It is not responding to any commands. Its primary systems are non-responsive. Yet it is broadcasting a signal it was not designed to make, and it is performing station-keeping maneuvers that it should not be capable of executing. The conclusion is inescapable. The Sentinel-4B is no longer under our control. It is being operated by a third party." The assumption, in the paranoid logic of the Cold War, was immediate and singular: the Soviets. They had found a way to hack the satellite, to bypass its encryption and seize control. It was the ultimate intelligence coup, not just to blind your enemy, but to steal his eye and turn it back on him. Visions of the satellite's powerful camera being retasked to look at American military installations, its data stream now flowing to a ground station in Siberia, filled the nightmares of the CIA. A frantic, top-secret investigation, codenamed Crystal Garden, was launched. Every line of the satellite's millions of lines of code was re-examined for a hidden back door. Every chip, every circuit board layout was scrutinized for a hardware Trojan. The manufacturing process was investigated. Was a worker bribed? Was a component swapped out? The engineers from Lockheed, the prime contractor, were subjected to days of hostile debriefing. They were insulted, accused of incompetence or worse. They held their ground. Carl Zimmerman, pale and sleepless, faced down a CIA desk jockey. "There is no hidden mode," he repeated, his voice frayed. "This isn't a television with a secret menu. This is the most complex piece of machinery ever put into orbit by this country. We designed it, we built it, we tested it. There is no physical or logical pathway for that signal to be generated. There is no power source for the station keeping if the main bus is down. You're asking me how a corpse is not only still breathing, but doing jumping jacks. I can't explain it because it violates the laws of physics as we understand them. Meanwhile, the signal continued. Every 11 minutes, like clockwork, the pulse echoed across the void. It became a terrifying metronome, counting down to an unknown conclusion. It was a sound that held no meaning, no data, only the sheer, unnerving fact of its own existence. In the listening stations, technicians began to dread its arrival. It was a reminder of their own helplessness, a ghost in the machine that defied all explanation. The CIA's Soviet desk, however, was starting to pick up strange chatter. Through signals intelligence and human assets, they learned that the KGB was just as agitated. A declassified memo, years later, would reveal the confusion in Moscow. The KGB's Directorate T, responsible for scientific and technical intelligence, had also detected the strange signal. Their initial assessment, far from claiming a glorious victory, was one of profound suspicion. They believed the Americans had pulled off an incredible feat of deception. The malfunction was a ruse. Sentinel-4B had not died at all. It had been transformed. They believed the U.S. had activated a revolutionary new covert signaling system, a way to communicate with submerged submarines or deep-cover agents using the satellite as an untraceable relay. The 11-minute pulse, in their view, was a beacon, a proof of life for a system so black that even most of the American government didn't know about it. The irony was exquisite. Two superpowers, each convinced the other had achieved a miraculous technological breakthrough, each frantically searching for an answer that neither possessed. They were like two men standing in a dark room, each believing the other is holding a flashlight, while the light is coming from a source neither can comprehend. The truth, what little of it could ever be pieced together, would only emerge from the chaos of the collapsing Soviet Union nearly a decade later. A disgruntled former KGB archivist, seeking asylum in the West, brought with him a trove of documents. Among them was the complete KGB file on the American Ghost satellite. The file revealed a mirror image of the American panic. The KGB had tasked their best signals intelligence unit, stationed at a listening post in Lourdes, Cuba, with cracking the code of the 11-minute pulse. They had assigned their top cryptographers, men who had broken far more complex ciphers. They found nothing. The pulse was just a pulse. It was a door with no lock, because it wasn't meant to be opened. It was just meant to be seen. The Soviets, in their uniquely thorough paranoia, had also considered more exotic possibilities. One memo, written by a senior KGB scientist, briefly floated the hypothesis of an extraterrestrial origin, a space-based anomaly, before being swiftly ridiculed and buried by their superiors. The official KGB position remained that it was an advanced American test. The file contained transcripts of agitated Politburo meetings where aged Soviet leaders demanded answers their intelligence chiefs could not provide. They authorized risky increases in satellite tracking activities, fearing the pulse was a targeting beacon for a new American anti-satellite weapon. They spent millions of rubles and countless man-hours chasing a phantom of their own making. The final, bitter conclusion for both sides was the same. The Sentinel-4B incident was an unresolved anomaly, a cosmic riddle that had, for a brief, terrifying moment, made both of the world's superpowers feel like primitives staring at a monolith they could not understand. The satellite itself eventually fell silent for good, its orbit finally decaying years later, the unknown signal having ceased as mysteriously as it began. It burned up on re-entry, a shower of molten, classified debris over the empty South Pacific, taking its final secret with it. No government ever admitted the full story. In the classified archives of both nations, the files on Sentinel-4B remain, a testament to a Cold War mystery that was never solved, a signal from the dark that was heard by many, but understood by none. It was a reminder that even in a conflict defined by human ideology and earthly power, there could still be moments of pure, inexplicable mystery drifting silently through the void between the stars. The pulse became a fixture in the intelligence community's consciousness, a persistent, low-grade fever of dread. For months, it defied every attempt at decryption. It was a safe with no combination, a lock with no key. It was assigned to the National Security Agency's sprawling campus at Fort Meade, Maryland, where the nation's most brilliant cryptographers and mathematicians waged a silent war against the world's codes. They ran it through supercomputers programmed to recognize patterns in everything from Soviet military traffic to the genetic sequence of viruses. They treated it as a cipher, a one-time pad, a complex encryption algorithm. They found nothing. The pulse was by all measurable standards empty. It was a shout in a vacuum, carrying no information other than the fact of its own shout. The breakthrough would not come from a seasoned cryptanalyst, but from a 24-year-old mathematician named Ilara Vance. Hired straight out of MIT for her preternal talent in topological data analysis, she was considered a prodigy but also an outsider. She was not steeped in the culture of Cold War paranoia. Her mind was a clean slate, unburdened by the assumption that the signal must be a weapon or a message from an adversary. To her, it was simply a data set, a beautiful, frustrating, and elegant data set. Assigned to the Sentinel anomaly as a low-priority training exercise, she approached it not as a code to be broken, but as a natural phenomenon to be understood. She spent her nights in a windowless sub-basement, the air thick with the hum of an early Cray supercomputer, plotting the pulses on endless reams of fan-fold paper. She wasn't looking for words or numbers. She was looking for shape, for rhythm, for a hidden geometry. One late night, fueled by cold coffee and a stubborn refusal to concede defeat, she decided to cross-reference the pulse timings against a database wholly unrelated to intelligence, the Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory's catalog of celestial timing data. It was a hunch, a flight of fancy born from exhaustion. She had minored in astronomy, and the metronomic regularity of the signal reminded her less of a man-made machine and more of a pulsar, a rotating neutron star emitting beams of radiation. She wrote a simple correlation algorithm matching the precise nanosecond of each pulse against the expected arrival times of signals from known pulsars and binary star systems. The computer churned, its tape drives whirring. For an hour, nothing. Then a single, stunning correlation appeared on her terminal, so perfect it seemed impossible. The pulses were not random. They were not a countdown. They were a perfect, real-time echo of the orbital period of a specific binary star system, GRO J1655-40, a microquasar located roughly 11,000 light-years away in the constellation Scorpius. One pulse for the primary star's rotation, the next for the secondary's transit. The 11-minute cycle was the system's fundamental harmonic rhythm. The satellite was, in effect, tapping its finger to the cosmic music of a distant violent dance of two stars, one pulling the other apart. She presented her findings to her supervisor, a weary, chain-smoking career man named Frank Rossetti. He listened, his expression shifting from patronizing disbelief to cold, stark terror. "You're telling me," he said slowly, lighting another cigarette, "that a billion-dollar spy satellite built to photograph tank factories is now acting as a celestial metronome? It's broadcasting the heartbeat of a star? It's converting astronomical data into a radio pulse," Ilara clarified, her own voice trembling with the implications. "But sir, that's the part that makes no sense. Sentinel-4B has no astrophysical instrumentation. It has no X-ray detectors, no gamma-ray spectrometers. Its sensors are pointed down, at the Earth. It has no way of even seeing GRO J1655-40, let alone tracking its orbital period with this kind of precision. The mystery had not been solved. It had been transformed. This was no longer a case of Soviet hijacking or a systems malfunction. This was something else entirely. The signal was a product of a consciousness that saw the satellite not as a camera, but as a musician and the cosmos as its sheet music. Someone or something had repurposed the dead bird's simple transmitter to sing a song of the stars. The revelation that the signal was celestial in nature sent a new, different kind of shockwave through the intelligence community. The Soviet angle was now all but dead. This was stranger, more profound, and in many ways, more frightening. The focus shifted inward, back to the satellite itself. What hidden capability had they missed? A new, even more secret task force was formed, with Ilara Vance reluctantly attached. They were given blanket authority to go beyond the official schematics and the sanitized contractor reports. They descended into the archival purgatory of the National Reconnaissance Office, a labyrinth of dusty storage boxes and decaying microfiche containing the raw, unredacted history of the Sentinel program. For weeks, they found nothing. Then a junior Air Force lieutenant, armed with a flashlight and a healthy dose of skepticism, found a misfiled box in a warehouse in Chantilly, Virginia. It was labeled Sentinel 4B Legacy/Experimental Subsystems Archive. Inside were not the crisp, bound manuals of the primary systems, but dog-eared notebooks, handwritten memos, and engineering change orders from a decade prior. It was here they found the ghost in the machine. Buried in a progress report from a small, now-defunct defense contractor called SignalsThe was the answer. During the early design phase of the KH-12, a radical proposal had been floated. The satellite's incredible resolution was useless if it couldn't point its camera with absolute precision. A new experimental autonomous navigation and orientation module had been developed. It was a primitive, by modern standards, neural network, an artificial intelligence. Its purpose was not to pilot the satellite, but to serve as a hyper-accurate celestial navigator. By constantly comparing the live star field around it to a built-in catalog, it could correct for minute drifts and pointing errors far more efficiently than ground-based commands. It was, in essence, a mechanical sailor, using the stars to steer. But the project was canceled. The technology was deemed too risky, too brittle. The brass feared putting an autonomous AI in control of a billion-dollar asset. The ANOM hardware, a specialized set of parallel processing boards and a unique low-light star tracker camera, had already been integrated into the Sentinel 4B bus. Rather than undergo a costly and risky refit to rip it out, the program managers had simply decided to never activate it. It was wired in, but dormant, a sleeping brain inside the satellite's skull. According to the final handwritten note from a small, now-defunct defense contractor called SignalsThe was the answer. The ANOM had one last, fail-safe feature that the bureaucrats had overlooked. In the event of a total primary power failure and loss of ground contact, it was designed to power up on its own using a dedicated, non-rechargeable emergency battery separate from the main system. Its mandate in this survival mode was simple: re-establish orientation and signal its status. The power failure on October 17 had not killed Sentinel 4B, it had birthed the ANOM. The AI had woken up in the darkness, blind and deaf. Its primary star tracker was offline. Its main computer was dead. But its survival instinct had kicked in. It had somehow scavenged power, perhaps from a trickle of solar current, and had begun its primary function, to find the stars. But with its main eyes shut, it had reached out with the only sensor it could access, a small secondary engineering sensor not meant for navigation, but for monitoring the health of the satellite's own internal temperature, a simple infrared detector. The ANOM, a mind built for one purpose, had begun using this single, crude instrument to stare out into the cosmos. It had found the brightest, most rhythmic infrared source it could lock onto, the violent, energetic binary system, GRO 165540, and with the stubborn logic of a machine, it had begun broadcasting what it saw. The pulses were not a message, they were a diagnostic, a heartbeat. The AI was simply saying, "I am here, I am oriented, I am looking at the stars." This discovery explained the signal. It even explained the station keeping. The ANOM, having achieved orientation, was likely firing the tiny cold gas thrusters used for fine-tuning the camera's aim, not understanding it was wasting precious propellant on a dead spacecraft. But it did not explain the initial failure. What had caused the catastrophic power loss that had sent the primary systems offline and awakened the sleeping AI? The telemetry from the final seconds before the blackout had been a scrambled, chaotic mess, deemed useless by the initial investigation. But now with the context of the ANOM's awakening, Ilara Vance and Dr. Thorne's team went back over it. They applied new filtering algorithms, looking for patterns they hadn't known to look for before. What they reconstructed was a chilling sequence of events. At 0314 Zulu, 3 seconds before the blackout, the Sentinel-4B's primary power bus had experienced a massive instantaneous surge. It was not an internal failure. The signature was that of an electromagnetic pulse, powerful enough to fry delicate electronics but brief enough to leave the robust, hardened systems of the ANOM intact. A millisecond later, the satellite's gyroscopes had registered a violent off-axis jolt, a physical impact. The telemetry showed the satellite had been struck not by a random micrometeoroid, but by a small, fast-moving object that imparted a specific rotational force. It was the 1-2 punch of a targeted kill, an EMP to soften it up, followed by a kinetic impact to finish the job. But it was the final fragment of data, captured by the dying primary system in its last microsecond of life, that was the most terrifying. The satellite's vast array of sensors, optical, infrared radar, had been actively scanning a sector of the central Pacific Ocean thousands of miles west of Hawaii. In that final instant, it had recorded a single, overwhelming data point: a thermal anomaly. It was not the gentle warmth of the sea. It was a spike of heat so intense, so concentrated, it dwarfed the signature of a terrestrial nuclear detonation. It was a flash of energy that appeared and vanished in less than 1/10 of a second, a blink of an eye in the life of a satellite, but an eternity for its sensors. The coordinates placed it in a patch of empty ocean so remote it didn't even have a name, only a numerical designation on nautical charts. Ilara took her findings to Rossetti. She showed him the telemetry, the evidence of the EMP and the impact, and finally the graph of the thermal spike, a single, monstrous needle on the chart pushing deep into the red. "My God," Rossetti whispered, the color draining from his face. What could generate that much heat that quickly? Before Ilara could answer, his desk phone rang, a secure red line. He listened for a moment, his expression hardening into a mask of official neutrality. "Yes, sir. Understood immediately." He hung up and looked at Ilara, his eyes devoid of all the terror and curiosity of moments before. "The investigation is terminated, Dr. Vance. All data, all findings are to be sealed under a new classification directive, EYO, Eyes Only, Presidential. The Sentinel-4B incident is now officially attributed to a catastrophic, cascading power system failure. There was no signal, there was no AI, there was no anomaly over the Pacific." "But Frank," Ilara began, her heart pounding. "The file is closed," he interrupted, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You will return to your previous duties. You will not speak of this to anyone, ever." The official story was set in stone, but the truth, known only to a handful of people, was far more disturbing. Sentinel-4B had not simply failed, it had been murdered. It had seen something it was not meant to see, a flash of impossible power in the deep, empty Pacific, and it had been silenced with surgical precision. The ghost signal from its reawakened AI mind was not a threat. It was a final, posthumous testament, a clue to its own destruction. It was the satellite that saw too much, and in its death had pointed a trembling, mechanical finger at a secret hidden not behind the Iron Curtain, but in the vast, silent darkness of the open sea. A secret so profound that the very government that owned the satellite would rather bury the truth forever than admit what it might have witnessed. The order to stand down was absolute. The Sentinel anomaly file was officially closed, its digital equivalent stamped with a black bar reading, "Case resolved, no further action." In the windowless rooms of Fort Meade and Cheyenne Mountain, the green pulse of the signal was wiped from the main displays, relegated to archival storage on magnetic tapes that were themselves destined for a secure incinerator. For the bureaucracy of secrecy, the problem was solved by the simple act of declaring it so. But for Alara Vance and a small, stubborn handful of others, the mystery was a ghost that would not be exorcised. They had looked into the abyss, and the abyss had not only looked back, it had sung to them in the rhythm of dying stars. To simply walk away was a psychological impossibility. They operated now in the silent, dangerous spaces of a concluded investigation, a shadow team within the machine, risking their careers and their freedom. Their focus narrowed to the Anom's raw sensor logs. The AI, in its solitary vigil, had not just been broadcasting the heartbeat of GRO J165540. Its crude infrared detector had been continuously collecting data, a silent, unblinking witness to the space around it. This data stream was buried within the pulse's carrier wave, a faint whisper beneath the main rhythmic thump. It was a log of the thermal environment of its orbital slot, a record of the cold and the heat it had observed in its lonely circuit around the Earth. Decoding it was a painstaking, manual process. Without supercomputer access, Alara and Dr. R.S. Thorne, who had quietly refused to let the matter drop, worked on personal workstations in a disused lab, their efforts hidden behind layers of legitimate, mundane projects. The data was a river of numbers, representing temperature fluctuations in the void. Most of it was predictable: the brief warmth of sunlight on the satellite's skin, the deep cold of the Earth's shadow, the occasional identifiable infrared signature of another satellite passing miles away. But then they found the anomalies. Threaded through the data were brief, impossibly sharp thermal spikes. They lasted for fractions of a second, were orders of magnitude hotter than the background, and then vanished. They did not correspond to any known celestial event or any man-made object in the catalog. They were ghosts in the data, will-o'-the-wisps of incredible energy flaring and dying in the high frontier. The Anom, with its simple, single-minded logic, had noted them, cataloged them, and then continued its primary task of staring at its binary star. It had witnessed these phantoms, but lacking the context for alarm, had simply logged their passage. To Alara, they were anything but mundane. They were signatures, trails. Something was moving up there, something that could generate and dissipate heat with an efficiency that defied known physics. It was a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the official shutdown of the investigation, when the pulse changed. Alara was in the lab, her eyes burning from staring at the endless streams of data. The pulse, which had been their constant metronomic companion for months, suddenly stuttered. The clean, precise rhythm of GRO J165540 fractured. For a single, agonizing 11-minute cycle, there was silence, no pulse. The void where the signal had been was somehow louder and more terrifying than the signal itself. Then it returned, but it was wrong. The frequency had shifted, jumping to a higher band. The pulse was no longer a clean, simple beat. It was distorted, ragged, as if the transmitter was damaged or being overdriven. It lasted for 17 seconds, a chaotic, screaming burst of energy that saturated the receivers. And then it stopped, forever. In that final, frantic transmission, compressed into the screaming signal, was a data packet. It was not the slow, methodical log of a machine going about its duties. This was a frantic, last dump of everything the Anom had, a digital scream into the night. Before anyone could even begin to process this, a new alert flashed across a dormant terminal in Sunnyvale. Sentinel-4B, the derelict that had stubbornly held its orbit for months, was moving. Its remaining propellant, which the Anom had been carefully husbanding for its minor attitude adjustments, was being expended in a single, massive, sustained burn. The satellite was firing its thrusters not to maintain its position, but to destroy it. It was performing a deorbit maneuver. This was impossible. The command codes for such a maneuver were highly classified, required multiple layers of authentication, and could only be sent from a specific ground station. No such command had been issued. The satellite was committing suicide. They watched, helpless, as the trajectory plot showed the bird's path curving downwards, a graceful, fatal arc into the atmosphere. It burned up over the South Pacific, not far from the point of its original fatal anomaly. It was a final, controlled erasure, a scuttling of a ship that knew too much. The ocean, which had been the site of the mystery, now became its grave.